I'm Kate Raworth, I'm a renegade economist, and I'm passionate about rewriting economics so that it's fit for the 21st century. Go back to the ancient Greek roots, and economics means household management. So how are we going to manage our planetary household in the interest of all of its inhabitants? I believe we need to start economics with a new understanding of prosperity. And when I tried to draw it, strange though it sounds, it came out looking like a donut. So let me introduce you to this one donut that might actually turn out to be good for us. The hole in the middle here is a place where people are falling short on the resources they need to meet life's essentials, where people don't have enough food or water, housing, healthcare, education to meet those essentials that every human being has a claim to. And I crowdsourced these from the world's governments, from the Sustainable Development Goals. So we want to leave no one behind in the hole in the middle of the donut, but get them over that social foundation. But, and it's a big but, at the same time, we cannot overshoot the outer ring, because there we begin to put so much pressure on this extraordinary living planet that we begin to kick it out of balance. We cause climate breakdown, acidify the oceans, a hole in the ozone layer, biodiversity loss, and these 9 dimensions are known as the planetary boundaries, drawn up by Earth system scientists who believe they are the critical life-supporting systems that keep our planet in the Holocene-like benevolent state for humanity that it's been in for the last 11,000 years. So in the simplest of terms, the aim here is to meet the needs of all within the means of the planet. No one left in the hole without overshooting the outer ring. Where are we today on this challenge? It's not an easy picture to look at, because we are falling short and overshooting at the same time. On the social foundations, we are falling short on every one of those dimensions. For food, for example, you can see that little red wedge goes 11% of the way towards the middle of the circle, because 11% of people worldwide don't have enough food to eat every day. On water, 9% of people don't have access to clean water, and 1 person in 3 worldwide doesn't have access to what we'd call a toilet. But on every one of these dimensions, you can see that people are falling far short, in countries rich and poor. And yet at the same time, we have already overshot at least 4 of these planetary boundaries: on climate change, on biodiversity loss, on transforming too much of the Earth's surface for human use, and choking life in lakes, rivers and oceans with excessive fertilizer runoff. So this image, this is our selfie, we the people of the early 21st century. Can we begin to turn this picture around? Well, I believe if we're going to do so, we need new economics at the heart of education worldwide. Economic teaching today still begins with supply and demand, as if to say the economy is essentially the market and the market's in equilibrium. I think that's 2 untruths in 1 sentence, and it's not a good place to begin. So I would replace that with this diagram that I call the embedded economy diagram. Now what you can see here is the economy embedded within society, within the living world, with drawing in materials and matter and spewing out waste and pollution, and bathed in a river of solar energy. So right from day one, we can ask the essential question of ecological economics, which is how big can that through flow of energy and matter be before the economy begins to disrupt the very life-supporting systems on which we depend. But also you can see the economy itself is made up not just of the market and the state, but also of the household, that place of unpaid caring work, and also the commons, where people co-create things that they value, often with no money changing hands. And these 4 forms of provisioning each bring unique qualities and best work when they work together. Finance should be in service to the functioning of these kinds of provisioning, in service to society. Now, if this is a starting point for economics, I believe we need to put 2 design principles at the heart of creating economies that can actually meet the needs of all within the means of the planet. We need to create economies that are regenerative by design and distributive by design. I'll say a little on each of those. To be regenerative by design, let's start with this image. The 20th century linear degenerative economy. We would take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use them for a while, and then throw them away. And this process of take, make, use, lose cuts against the cycles of the living world and pushes us over planetary boundaries, never using up Earth's resources, but using them again and again, recognizing that waste from one process becomes food for another. And we need to create economies that run on sunlight. So we'll look up, not down, for energy this century. If we can create economies that are regenerative by design, they also need to be distributive by design. In the 20th century, we've seen many concentrated forms of ownership, of generating electricity, of ownership of companies, of ownership of land and housing. But we have unprecedented opportunities to now create economies that are far more distributive of value than they have been in the past. The 20th century focused on redistributing income, but I think this century we can go deeper and look for opportunities to pre-distribute the sources of wealth creation. The wealth that arises, for example, from owning land or housing. The wealth that arises from the ownership of enterprise, not necessarily now through stock and share-owned companies, but through employee-owned or cooperatively owned companies. The wealth that arises from generating energy. The 20th century depended upon oil rigs and coal mines. The 21st century, every household can have a micro power station on the roof. And the wealth that arises from access to ideas and information. Thanks to the internet, which looks like this distributed network from space, we have an unprecedented opportunity to be distributive by design. Can we create the economic institutions that will actually make this happen? So if we create economies that are regenerative and distributive by design, what does this mean for the future of GDP growth? Well, in the 20th century, GDP growth became almost a target of its own, and it was assumed that it would rise like an ever-rising line without end. But if you look to nature, nothing in nature grows forever. Things grow and grow up and mature, and by doing so, they can then thrive for a very long time. Why would we imagine that our economies would be the one system that would actually buck this trend? I believe the existential economic question of the 21st century is the future of economic growth. Because today we have economies that need to grow whether or not they make us thrive. And what we need are economies that make us thrive whether or not they grow. These are the challenges and indeed the opportunities and the adventures of 21st century economics.